Morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm good. I was looking back over messages and saw a request by you to help with minutes. And I'm not very good at doing three things at once, but I'm happy to try to keep minutes. But I did a little research, and as long as we're in Zoom mode, there's a way for you to grant, for example, me access to put a local recording of our session on here so that I could play it back and make better minutes. I don't know that I have it totally figured out, but I don't know if you have any experience with this.
I know it records and it downloads, so let me see if I can try and email it to you.
Oh, it'll be big.
I
It'll
know.
be really big.
Well, I can also just send you the audio. I don't have to send you everything.
Right. So one of the this is something that I think that the Planning Commission and frankly the rest of the city meeting should be doing as time, forever. We have a way to do this. If we have an internet connection, we have a way of recording our sessions and archiving them and making it so that if people can't be present, they can either see it from home in the moment that it's happening or see it later on. It's just like what the county was doing. And I don't know what the program was there, but this sort of offers a way to do that.
We can definitely look into it.
Are you guys talking about that? I mean, sort of how, based on the experience that we've had over the last couple of months, how it might change the way we conduct business from now until whenever, forever?
I think they're looking at it. I just haven't been involved in those conversations.
Because I think all of these things. Good morning, Tom. Is Tom here?
I'm here.
Yeah, is just to be able to have better records of what we do. I mean, we have these meetings, we talk, but we don't really have any real record that anybody else can see. And there's important stuff here, and maybe it's less of an issue for these subcommittees, but I think it's still an issue for the subcommittees. Anyway, it looks like we're probably here, aren't we?
Yes.
All right.
Okay. So last meeting, we kind of went through, made some changes to the ordinance proposal, and then you guys had homework. So how did that go?
I'm, a lot of my stuff about critical, a lot of the things I've been talking about are more perhaps something that falls in a critical area category. I mean, you could argue that some of the environmental resources within the city serve as facilities, but they're, it's kind of a long shot. You'd said something about a table or trying to come up with something along classifying different facilities. Do I have that right?
Yeah, we talked about that.
So I sent you, Janelle, the words directly out of FEMA that define critical infrastructure. And I really feel strongly we don't want to deviate from that. I understand some of your concerns, but I think we need to make sure the ordinance portion that we're writing is dealing with sea level rise and floodplain and the marshes barriers get covered under their own sections. Otherwise, the code is going to become unmanageable. If all the sections get intermixed in different sections, no one's going to be able to find where they are. That's not a good organizational technique, in my opinion.
As long as we cover them, I think that sounds great.
Yeah, I have no objection. I think your points are extremely well taken, Sumner. It's just we can't mash them all into one section.
No, I totally agree with that. It becomes unwieldy. Not having the FEMA document in front of me, I mean, is there a way to put it up on the screen or send me a link or something? I'm not sure I have that.
Have what? I'm sorry.
The FEMA definition that you were just describing, Tom.
Sure, I can forward it to you by email.
Here, I can actually bring it up.
Yeah,
Okay.
there you go. That's what I was figuring.
I just had to go get it. Let me share my screen.
Because much earlier on, I had spent a lot of time looking at the 500-year floodplain risks and talking with FEMA Philadelphia and DENREC.
Did you all see the FRAM document that I sent both of you guys? Because, I mean, I think the state's done a nice job of trying to figure that out. And although Executive Order 41 sort of is geared towards state agencies, there's a lot of good information in there that I think we could use.
So you see the bottom part of the email's got, it's a direct cut and paste out of the FEMA regs.
Right there. I'm just gonna highlight it in the gray. So that's their critical facility.
That all sounds great. The last sentence, I think, is the last two sentences are the key piece. What's a higher level of protection? And I guess the emergency plans aren't really our job, but I'm curious how we figure out that higher level of protection, how that gets specified.
Okay, so my question is we have a definition of critical in the zoning code. Do we want to make changes to it based on what this is saying, or do we want to adopt I prefer not to have to adopt another definition of critical facilities, so we don't have two definitions conflicting with each other or critical areas, because less confusion is always good.
But do you know, I don't have it. I thought this was exactly what's in our code also.
Let me grab the code. So I stopped sharing so I can do a little.
Yeah, I thought I need to get a second screen.
Yeah, I'm pulling it up right now.
Okay, so let me share the screen again. And then here's the definition of critical facility. And then I'll bring up, and I'm just gonna minimize that so we can actually see if I can get both. It looks like we're covering the same uses, it's just not the exact same definition.
Right. But
As long as we haven't left anything out here, I think we should go with what we've got.
Okay. I want to make sure there wasn't anything you wanted to add, anything that was missing.
So what are category 3 and category 4 assignments pursuant to the building code? What are we talking about there?
I believe that's how they're constructed per the building code.
So these are things like how fortified they are against storms of certain strengths and things like that?
Typically, yes. It could be,
Okay.
I'm just off the top of my head, it could be based on if it's in a hurricane zone, wind issues, flood issues, those types of risk categories.
So we've talked about roads along the way. They should not be considered, certain roads should not be considered critical facilities. Is that the idea?
That's up to you guys. Do you guys want to, because we've got roads as being needing to be worked on as a critical facility. We do actually have public roadways in the proposed ordinance.
And then, of course, I mean, I know we've talked about this, but in the definition there, you know, there's the whole issue of the infrastructure that helps us deal with excess water. For example, the stormwater system. I mean, it's not, we don't have a perfect network of stormwater pipes, but in some areas, the stormwater pipes are kind of an important part of it. Should
Yes.
they be factored into this in some way?
So I think that's where they would fall under the public utilities.
Okay.
And we've asked that those be created to the 40-year sea level rise projection.
Yeah, if someone to your earlier question, if you go to the building code, there's a whole section in the front where they define risks, and it's seismic, wind, flooding, and that's what that's referring to.
Okay.
I mean, I think roads, they're two separate classes. There's evacuation roads, which is brought up in some of the reports, that they need to be kept clear. And then there are the other roads. But you wouldn't want to declare them critical infrastructure because it says don't build in critical infrastructures in the floodplains.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Means we wouldn't have any roads in the city of Lewis.
Again, right now we're looking at existing and critical facilities, because
Right.
for new development, we'll get into, you know, if we're going to build a new road, new development for redevelopment. But right now we put roadways under critical facilities for that reason, because I think we agreed that, you know, those were items we needed to take a look at and needed to make sure we were addressing. So if we're good on the definition, for the purpose, you guys asked me to look and add like public safety. I thought about it, was looking into it, and realized the whole zoning ordinance is for the public welfare and safety. So I didn't think it needed to be reiterated into the purpose statement, because that's the holistic purpose of the zoning code.
So it's implicit in anything that we have within the zoning code, wherever it may be.
Correct. Welfare, safety is the main thing. So, and I did update the reference and went with the Delaware Sea Level Rise Technical Committee, that their report that's used by DENREC, because that's the most recent report that DENREC is using for, and that's the group that's doing that, because they did the 2017 update, and they're the group working on the sea level rise.
In the spirit of clarity, sort of going on what Tom was saying earlier about making sure we've got nice, neat sections and we don't try to overwhelm everything, put it all in one place. Is it worth having some of these reference documents available off the city website so that there's no doubt, you know, as the, you know, DENREC updates things and we're referencing that update, that we have it hanging off of our website somewhere so that everybody can find it when they need it?
Yeah, once I think we get this updated and we can add links to the website, that's not a problem.
Janelle, if I could take it back
on the website. Go ahead, Tom.
I think the purpose statement of this does need to highlight health and safety, because the general purpose statement in the front of 197 is very broad because, you know, it's lessen congestion in streets, it's maintain harmony in zoning districts, it's historic relation, you know, the core values. And while one of them is health and safety, the whole purpose of this section is health and safety. It's none of the other ancillary. And we do in the zoning districts in the purpose statement state what the focus of that zoning district is. So I know it might be somewhat redundant with the overarching 197.3 purpose statement, but just to be clear that this whole section that we're proposing, 73, is about health and safety. It's not other things.
What would be those other things?
Well, the other things, like I said, are lessen congestion in the streets, provide adequate light and air, prevent the crowding of land, maintain the character of each district and its peculiar suitability for particular use. The 6 core values of the relationship to the sea, diversity, all those other things.
Well, okay, so you know, a lot of the comments and the questions that I've raised since we started this, and frankly, since I joined the Planning Commission, they start with what I mean, I guess the question I ask is, for whom are we protecting health and safety? Is it simply for the human residents, or are we also worried about the other aspects of the environment, the ecosystem that exists here? And I know that those are terms that probably have people rolling their eyes, but you know, the relationship to the sea, the beauty of this area, I think the attraction of this area in part has to do with the natural elements. And I think one of the things that I've been trying to think about is, are we protecting the natural elements as we're protecting our own safety and welfare? I just want to make sure that we don't lose that natural infrastructure, what is being called green infrastructure in certain circles. We don't lose that and somehow sideline that, because I think that's also important.
Well,
So
the last paragraph under the purpose statement, D2, techniques to make use of green infrastructure for management of stormwater, as outlined in Chapter 9 of the EPA, the principles of smart growth. So it's implicit in several of the categories, Sumner, but it's not explicit that we're, you know, called out that we're protecting the dolphins and the whales. But
I'm not even thinking about the dolphins and the whales. I mean, from the very beginning, my issue has been wetlands and shorelines and things like that.
yeah, and that's why there's an entire section of the code regarding environmental. That's why we're looking at this. These are all sections of the code that end up helping that. So that's why we're doing this. So
my point is that resiliency shouldn't be just about protecting humans. My point is that resiliency and everything that's in the purpose here and everything that you might add to that purpose should also be thinking about the resilience of the more natural elements that fit right into the city. It's not just about protecting human welfare.
no, because zoning is about how you use the land, and it's the protection and the use of the land. So it kind of defaults back to zoning is, how are we using the land? What are we doing to protect the land? What makes sense for each area of the land to be used? That's what zoning's looking at. It's not about a person, and it does in the broader sense, you know, protect that, but it's also, you know, if we're protecting the land, we're looking at that environmental aspect as well to ensure that the land's being protected, then we are protecting the people, because the health, safety, and welfare of the public, that includes the environmental, because if the land's not healthy, then the public's not healthy.
Yeah, and we do have sections that specifically call it out. I mean, the wellhead protection, the stormwater design sections are really all about protecting the land. You can argue whether they're successful or not, but I mean, that's what those sections are ostensibly there for.
Right. I mean, the purpose statement for the wetlands is to provide standards for protecting wetlands in development projects. That's the purpose of the wetlands. So, you know, I think sometimes we just need to realize what is the purpose of resiliency. And I think if we recognize that we're promoting adaptability, resiliency is the ability to recover and endure the impacts from the climate environmental changes. I think that includes, to me, not just people, but the land.
I agree. As long as everybody understands that, I can live with the purpose statement as it is right here.
Okay. So we're good on that. I updated the sea level rise projection based on the correct verbiage group from DNREC that we're using. There was a question about 1A about the natural drainage, and I just kind of put it, ensure the drainage is not adversely impacted. Kind of left it a little broad. Hopefully that will address some of the concerns, because what we want is when we're doing a road that we don't create drainage issues.
So I didn't get to go to the last floodplain committee meeting, but I mean, this is a logical place to bring up that coordination. So I mean, I think that was the key question that seemed to be bubbling up in that commission, that subcommittee is, well, how much is significant? You know, when is it really an issue? How much excess water can you have?
They are focusing right now on whether fill is appropriate in the floodplain. They have agreed that fill makes sense to be allowed in the floodplain, but they're asking for documentation to be provided that when fill is used, that it doesn't negatively impact and that a report will be required. So if we're, more or less, if the city's doing the roads and we're gonna redo a road, the city's gonna do this. This isn't really for the public roadways. And again, we'll have to coordinate with DelDOT. This one does require coordination with DelDOT. But again, they also have their own sea level rise requirements, that when the city has to redo a road, that we are not creating a worse situation when we're trying to improve a situation for one item, we're not creating a worse situation for another item.
Okay. I just saw that Brett had a thing on the chat. I'm not sure how we're managing the chat. It's one of the things that I find most frustrating about this Zoom process. And I want to acknowledge that I agree with Brent on this no way to get underground infrastructure above the flood elevation. One of the reasons that I keep raising this is just that we factor in the way as the sea level rises, it changes the ability for water to be removed from certain areas. And I realize it's not an easy thing, but I think we need to be working on figuring out how to manage an increasing amount of water, an increasing number of hours in the day and days in the year when those underground infrastructure elements will be flooded at both ends. So.
Well, I'm not sure whether Brent is talking about, obviously you can't put stormwater, sewer, water, and underground electric lines above the flood elevation, but there's ways of floodproof or waterproofing them, because many utilities in many locations, regardless of sea level rise, are placed.
He's been frozen.
Yep, Tom is frozen. Hopefully he'll unfreeze.
Hello?
Try that again. We lost you for a minute there.
Oh, okay. There are design standards for ensuring that underground utilities that are in the water table or subject to the water table are maintained. For example, it used to be that we had a requirement that manhole covers be above the floodplain. That's not practical because you can't put manhole covers 3 feet above a road. So we've gone and put floodproof covers on the manway. The same thing is true for, underground electric utilities. I mean, that's all done with, waterproof splices and such. And, we are searching out I&I for the stormwater, the sewer system to reduce the influx of groundwater into the sewer system as lines are either repaired or replaced.
So
It's an ongoing issue, and it exists regardless of sea level rise, but it's exacerbated by sea level rise.
right. So B1 is really the roads. So for the concern there is if we're going to build a road, we don't build it higher than, say, the house that's next to it. So we are not negatively impacting drainage off the road into a house. That's really what that one's looking at. B2 is the utilities. And again, it's, designed to minimize flood damage to address that. So we gave them, like we discussed the last couple meetings, some flexibility in the ability to comply, so they're not stuck, because it just needs to be designed to minimize that.
I think you're missing a word in B1A.
Okay.
So the drainage is it like the area drainage? Is it the drainage from each parcel? What does that mean, the drainage?
Here, let's see if this one.
Well, it works both ways, doesn't it? Like you were saying before, we want to make sure we're not building roadways that somehow back up water on individual lots in certain neighborhoods.
So does that work a little bit better? So B1A now says ensure the drainage from the roadway does not adversely impact adjacent properties.
I actually was happy with the way you had it before, because drainage is just a general term, and it leaves it open to whether it's
Which way it's going?
cross properties, flow from the street, flow.
So maybe it was just taking a word out. So you're just saying
Okay.
ensure drainage is not adversely affected. I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, just take there out, ensure, or just take both of them out, ensure drainage is not adversely impacted.
Okay. There we go. And then when we got to B3, there was discussion of should it be designed to the 100-year or the life of the building? So I updated it to say shall be designed to the 100-year sea level rise projection or the projection for the life of the building.
And is that whichever is longest or whichever is shortest? I mean, what is that? Should there be something where you choose which one you have to choose?
Right, because that
If
was
I get to pick chocolate cake or boring old bread for breakfast, I think most of us know what I'm going to pick. So is there in that or which is it that you're supposed to pick?
This is
pick
coming
one
from
of
you
these.
guys because we discussed about having a table, a listing, and you guys asked for, the life of the building.
So that's assuming that the life of the building is less than the 100-year. I mean, that's my point. Is in. I mean, I guess that's what you mean by that.
Yeah, that was my take based on what you guys were telling me from the last meeting.
No, I think what we were trying to say was, and let's just use years in here, so that if we were choosing the 40-year or 60-year, if the life of the infrastructure is greater than that, that it'd be the greater of either the, whatever we choose, or the design life, or the life of the building. But also we have to be careful about using the term life of the building, because I thought we just wanted to allow ourselves some wiggle room here to say that is to be built within the projected time frame or appropriate life based upon the use of the building or the use of the infrastructure or the type of infrastructure. You know, this goes back to if you're building something like the wastewater treatment plant, which we always fall back to, you know, what's the limiting part of the building that has to be built to the floodplain? It's the floodproofing aspect. So it's either entrance doors or, you know, base elevation or whatever. And I think this, and going back to, I'm sorry, I'm kind of, this is train of thought. These are all facilities that are within government authority to build. I guess they're not, because we're talking about wireless and hospitals.
I'm starting to wish I had about 17 screens here. All right.
Yeah, I'm kind of wrestling with this. I don't know.
So just to throw something in, Charlie's got something in the chat that I think's a good question.
Yeah, I saw that. I wanted to get this one worked out before we
Okay.
went back to the other one.
Gotcha. Tom started off with, in what he just said, with something that was sort of like what I was imagining was, and that's why I raised the question about what it means, how we qualify the or in the last part of B3. What I imagined was whichever is longer, whichever is the more conservative.
Yeah, and that's what I would. It's the last sentence that becomes difficult. Hey, do you have anything to add to help out with how to define this?
Who?
Charlie. Charlie O'Donnell.
Yeah, we're gonna get to Charlie in a minute. I want to focus on this one first because I don't want to go back and forth.
That's what I meant. I mean, on this one here, if Charlie has any thoughts on where
Okay.
to clarify this.
Because
elevated.
As we discussed, we could always do like we've done elsewhere. Yeah, we're not getting into the bridge, Joe. Bridge is a DELDOT project. So we're gonna focus that on something else. Perfect. Thanks, Brent, for that information. Because when we discussed, you know, we were talking last meeting about putting in a table, or, you know, it's like certain lifespans built at certain levels. And then you guys said, you know, just try it this way. So this is what we're doing. So I'm just trying to, you know.
Well, and I understand that, Janelle. It's
what we like and what works.
Yeah.
So I added, or the projection for the life of the building, whichever is longer. Does that work?
I'm okay with that. I mean, the overall premise here is that for those facilities that we deem most critical, and we've got the definition, we want to be as we have the greatest aversion to risk, the least tolerance for exceedance of floods, right? So we need to build it as high as possible. So I think that's right, whichever is longer.
And Charlie just confirmed, like we've been talking about, is that certain things are designed for a certain number of years, and others may have a longer lifespan.
But you know, back to what Charlie's last comment was about the wastewater treatment plant being designed for 25 years. That may be true for the guts of the building, but the intent would be not to tear the building down if we retrofit it from membrane technology to ceramic technology for filtration. And that's where it gets to be complicated. That's why I think we need wiggle room here on those type of infrastructure, that engineering judgment be used.
I mean, the other aspect of this is, I mean, 25 years. I'm sorry, this is sort of this isn't my area of experience, but 25 years sounds like a really short time for something as critical as a sewer plant. I can't imagine this city could continue to build or rebuild on a 25-year time frame. It seems like that should be longer. Given the size of the facility, the expense of the facility versus the funds that we have and the ability that we have to fix it.
Right. The difference between, that's what I keep going back to, there's a difference between the building structure and the equipment inside of it. I mean, the pumps, the guts, the technology will change, and it is not designed for more than 25 years. But that doesn't mean that you want to be able to, you don't have to go in and demolish the entire building to retrofit.
So I think that's where we get into, like, if you're going to totally completely build a brand new facility, you're falling into 3. If you're going to redevelop, you fall into 4, which is redevelopment of a critical facility, which just says needs to be designed to minimize flood damage with the 100-year sea level rise projection.
We've used that the 100-year sea level rise projection. That's the number that comes. Okay, never mind. Got it.
And again, if you don't like 100, we can change it to 40, 50, whatever number you want. The numbers are all up for discussion.
It's right there at the top of B. I couldn't, sorry. I'm in the weeds right now. I'm always in the weeds. All right. So I think that's good. I mean, I think B3 as it stands is good.
Okay.
And given the way you said that, I mean, B4 is also good as it is written.
Okay. And then Charlie had a question about B1, what does that are located in construction? And I think that's what is, if you're located in the area of the sea level rise, or you're going to be constructed or reconstructed in that area, then that's designed to be minimized for the flood damage. I think we can work on that verbiage.
So you're saying public roadways that are located and constructed within the 100-year floodplain?
Well, again, all of this falls into, if you're, and we had that discussion at the last meeting, if you fall into the category that you have to comply with sea level rise, this is what you have to do.
I think Charlie's point is that we can probably drop and constructed.
Okay.
Public roadways that are located.
Seems like we need a where there, located where.
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting at. I mean, you can say located and constructed. What matters is what follows those
Or honestly, we can just say public roadways shall be designed to minimize, because technically this is gonna need to be for anything that falls into that area. So we can actually do that.
Well, then I think right up top, can you just move the cursor up so we can see the top?
Yep.
So then I think to do what you're saying, I think right up top at B, where sea level rise projection is labeled as this refers to a geographic area, and that all the things that follow need to figure out whether they are or aren't in that geographic area. That seems to be the assumption that you're making.
Well,
Right.
that was the large debate on last time, and that, Janelle had showed us that everything that's in the sea level rise is within the floodplain right now. Now, Janelle, is that true for the 100-year out? We looked at the 40-year last time.
No, it was the 100-year. The 100-year ended up going into the 0.2% a little bit, but and again, as we all understand, floodplain's going to change. But right now, and I even went back and checked a couple of other cities that I've been doing research on, and their sea level rise is really all happening where their floodplain is, because I was taking a look at where their flood was and then where their sea level rise sections of code were applying. And right now, it's really where the floodplain is. Now, again, floodplain's going to change, which means the sea level rise is going to change with it. But based on current data, the sea level rise is matching with the floodplain, which actually kind of makes sense, is that the sea level rise is going where it's lowest, where the floodplain is, which then may just push the floodplain out farther in the future.
All right, so now I'm starting to understand the phrase that you've now removed, the
Okay.
thing that Charlie was asking about. So basically, this is for any the detail of located and constructed was assuming there were roadways that were to be built. These are new ones. There's an aspect there of location, which is more specific than shall be designed to minimize flood damage. That's saying we want to locate it in such a way as to minimize flood damage.
I think this way, it just says public roadways shall be designed to minimize flood damage and to maintain accessibility within the 25-year sea level rise projection.
I'm just going to raise this here, that in the very nature of this process that we're going through here, starting with 197.73.1b, is that we are in a system that's changing. And we need to constantly keep in mind that, it's not a stationary system, it's not a static system, it's going to be changing.
Right, that's
the
why for roadways,
the roadway locations, we're not going to be rearranging, but the construction of the roadways obviously might be on a 25-year cycle. But I'm just throwing it out here. Is there a situation where it might make sense to not build, to dedicate land for a roadway, because it's, no matter what amount of engineering, it's going to be the wrong place to have a road.
But isn't that, I mean, that's the item D, new development.
yeah, I think we'll get into more discussion about new roads and their requirements when we get to new development.
So all of these B1 public roadways are existing public roadways?
Right now, yes.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I can't conceive that there's any place where we're going to put a new road in the city of Lewis that is not part of a development.
How does existing public roadways help?
That helps me.
Okay, that's perfect. That's why we're discussing. So that takes care of that. Do you want to do that for B2, existing public utilities? Because I think we'll get into utilities for new development as well.
this brings up an interesting problem, okay? If we put existing in here, then we have to redo all of this when it comes down to new development. I frankly think it would be easier, in the spirit of what Tom was saying earlier, for us to have a series of standards and a body of language that works for both existing and anticipated future stuff. I'm assuming that what falls under new development is going to be wrinkles that can't be covered by this kind of verbiage that we've got under critical facilities.
So again, think of it as 3 different categories: critical facilities, roads, utilities, critical facilities, covered there. Redevelopment, think of houses. Don't think of roads, because the roads are a critical facility. So think of
new development,
commercial structures, piers, houses are redevelopment. New development is new commercial, new residential, new industrial.
I get that. What about the new development? Then are we going to go and list out ultimately all of these kinds of categories under the new development as well? You know,
We may have like different things going on for new development. We may have things differently for redevelopment, because I think they're all going to have a different measure of what we need to look at to make sure they're complying with sea level rise.
Yeah, well, I think adding existing to item 1 is fine. I don't think you need to put it in bullet 2.
Okay.
Because I mean, that's going to be the generic category that we use for all utilities, I assume.
This is kind of why I brought this up.
Again, we're think of the bigger picture: critical facilities. What are our critical facilities? Pretty much they're existing right now. When we get into redevelopment, again, think housing, commercial that already exists, they're going to be redeveloped. You know, we've got houses in the floodplain. Do we want them to be built to a higher standard? We've got vacant parcels of land. At what level do we want them built to, and those items to be built to?
And bullet 3 is new construction of critical facilities, which is going to cover anything in item D, new development.
Yes, because it's a critical facility.
Right. So I think, yeah, I think just putting it on existing under item bullet 1 is fine.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Are we good with the way this is looking? Do we want to move? What next steps do you want to look at for moving this forward?
So, is the idea that we would try to push the details as we've got it now? We'd sort of push that up the process through the Planning Commission and ultimately City Council, or are we going to go and fill in C and D, for example?
The way I was looking at it is we'd get this through now, and then we'd come back and get C and D later.
My problem with that is that it puts, I guess I'd rather see C and D before I'd be comfortable with what's in B, A and B. Otherwise, we have this sort of piecemeal thing. To me, it makes more sense to have it all, but I appreciate the idea of getting things on the books and not belaboring it for too long. But my fear is whatever, it's sort of getting into this conversation we were just having about existing facilities and new facilities and so on. It's like, if we put this out now, what kind of confusion are we going to create? What are we going to have to mitigate later on when we're talking about particularly 1D in terms of referencing? I don't know, I'm just worried that it puts a little more burden on the later phases to make sure that they fit. And it might make it harder if we realize it would have been easier had we changed, the stuff we have right now with all the pieces done. I don't know if that makes sense.
Something I kind of agree with you in that it's only late June right now. And we can probably spend time to flush out C, and then maybe at that point, bring it to the planning commission. Or we can take this to planning commission, have a discussion, and see how they want to proceed as a total body.
Right, and frankly, the way that I would put that if we did that is to say, okay, next steps are C and D. I mean, you may have specific ideas about how we need to modify A and B, but you know, what are your recommendations as to how we, you know, what can we do in C and D? You know, this can start a discussion, I guess, what we have here.
Brent and Charlie have chimed in about B1. And the concern is the phrasing of it, and does it lock us into something? I think we need to get maybe Glenn to opine on this, but in my mind,
Of course.
shall be designed to minimize flood damage. Gives us flexibility that it's not shall be designed to prevent.
We just took that location thing out. I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this gives us that if it's financially not feasible, if the repercussions are minimal, that the phrasing of this gives us, once again, as a government entity, flexibility to deal with it. But I'd like to hear what Glenn thinks about the wording on it.
Oh, of course. We'll send this to Glenn. I want to make sure we've got it to a good point before we start sending it to Glenn. And again, if you guys don't want the 25-year, you can pick another number.
No, but I'm Brent's
happy with the wording. I think we just want to, you know, since Brent and Charlie have both raised this as a question, I think this gives us the flexibility, but I want to make sure our solicitor agrees.
Oh, absolutely. And again, that's also why we put A in there to ensure, because sometimes building it to the 25-year is just going to have a negative impact on drainage. So if we've said you can't negatively impact drainage, then that kind of gives the out for, you know, you're going to do something, maybe not completely get there. But it's better than what currently exists. That's
so
what we're coming from.
Is that what Charlie's saying? A couple, I guess it's just before Brent's. Can we touch on it? I'm not sure I understand what he's asking and how we deal with that, but that's seems to me an important.
Well, I think that's what he's touching on there is that it's often impossible to build considering a 25-year. And I'm saying that the wording of this shall be designed to minimize, I think gives us flexibility there. Because if we can't,
I get a little worried when we're imagining we need to minimize it, but we definitely don't want to be in a situation where we're creating more problems for the neighbors to the streets or whatever the utilities may be.
No, I think that's the section that I think we need some input from Glenn. And Brett comment is about, so redoing existing roads, are you looking to have it above the 25-year sea level rise or on top of the floodplain, or what elevation? This was exactly my question last time of what is the elevation, because we don't have
if you're in the floodplain, you have a base flood elevation. And again, most of these sites, areas are in that the sea level rise is going to be impacted on, are in the floodplain. So there's a base flood elevation. Then we'll say, okay, you have the base flood elevation. Then we're saying, then you need to meet half meter, meter, or half. I'm just throwing out numbers. Nobody hold me to those. Like, okay, you're at the base flood elevation. Well, I need you to then be an additional half meter or meter above your base flood elevation, because that's what the sea level rise projection is.
Based on the classes that we have here, whether it's a 25 or a 40-year or whatever, 100-year.
Correct. Based on the numbers and whatever the current, like right now, we're using the 2017 projections. So if 2021 new projections come out, they'll be using whatever the 25-year is in 2021.
Janelle, can you pull up my email again on the FEMA definition?
Oops, nope, not that one. I apparently closed it, so let me stop sharing for a minute so nobody needs to see all my hundreds of emails I'm going through.
Yeah, I'm with Charlie. I'm good with the minimization, the key, sort of wiggle room, and Tom's explanation.
Okay, there's your email, Tom.
Yeah, so the concern is that you notice that the FEMA uses the 500-year floodplain. And there is no defined elevation associated with the 500-year floodplain in a tidal ocean environment. And that's where I kept getting hung up on the last two meetings, is that, so what elevation are we using to add sea level rise to? We have 100-year flood elevations, but we do not have 500-year flood elevations. And they vary throughout the city by about 2 feet. Don't hold me to the absolute number, but if you go from the Back Bay, Canary Creek side to the ocean side, there's almost a 2-foot difference in what the 100-year flood base elevation is. And so when we say that roads shall be built to the 25-year sea level rise, what is the absolute elevation that we're talking about?
Right. The FRAM map, the Executive Order 41 based map, is a 2-dimensional map that shows areas that are subject to certain considerations. The 500-year floodplain subject area, it's areas subject to certain considerations, but you're exactly right, Tom. It doesn't specify the elevation that's going to matter, because the floodplain process, factors in, models in, the probability of certain kinds of water runoff and so on in certain areas. I don't know. We should try to figure that out. I don't know how we figure it out.
This is where we started at the first meeting, when I kept on, talking about, and Janelle, you did that picture graph of a house with the elevation. The problem is that the base elevation we don't know.
Well, I mean,
So if you're in the floodplain,
elevations,
you have go ahead.
the sea level, all the sea level numbers are, they're, the projections, the graphs that we've been referring to, the blue line and the 25 and 40 year and 100 year, you could pin those on a survey. You could put those on. The complicating factor is the floodplain analysis. I can't remember the terminology, but what FEMA does, FIRM does, to create the maps that they make, they take into account other variables that exacerbate, confound the simple elevation that you would get from those graphs. Because we could look at those graphs, 25-year, 40-year, 100-year, pick whatever color graph you want in the Sea Level Rise Technical Committee, and map out where those are. What's wet, what's not. But it's not going to account for that up and down stuff that happens in a given storm or whatever.
So every property has an elevation. When you get a survey for commercial, or if you're asking for topographical for a minor subdivision or a major subdivision, typically they do topography. If they're doing the topography, you have your elevation. And if something comes in and we realize, oh, based looking at your elevation, you're going to need to comply with sea level rise, well, then we have that elevation. So every property has an elevation.
Every property has an elevation of the ground. It does not have an elevation for either, I mean, a land surveyor doesn't go out and provide a map that shows the 100-year and the 500-year elevation for that topography.
But those can be derived from the NAVD 88 base
The 100-year
of
floodplain,
the survey.
the 100-year elevation can be, but the 500-year cannot.
So, and as we discussed last
There's a-
time, currently the sea level rise is not really impacting the 500-year. It's really impacting the 100-year. Even at, I think at the worst case scenario, you might be getting into the 500-year, but we are not using the high level. We're using intermediate range for sea level rise. So at that point, we're not really impacting the 500-year.
Let me try one more time in a different way. If we're in the middle of Canary Creek in Waders,
Good luck with that.
the alligators don't get us.
The mud's going to get you.
What is the base elevation that we're saying that if you were going to build a structure in the middle of Canary Creek, we have to build to? Because FEMA says that you have to take the 500-year base, and then we're saying we're going to add sea level rise on top of it. Since no one has defined what that 500-year elevation is, we know what the 100-year elevation is, but we don't know what the 500-year elevation is. We have 500-year for the middle of the Delaware Bay. We have 500-year for the Atlantic Ocean.
Well, there's a lot of places that even in the 100-year, the base flood elevation has not been determined. So if somebody's going to build that, because I've worked throughout the country, there are places where the base flood has not been determined. They know that it's in the floodplain, but FEMA has not done enough research to figure out the base flood. So if you're building there, you go get your elevation certificate, determine what your information is, and then you have to build accordingly. Because you have a surveyor going out, okay, this is the information, this is what you do additional research to determine that base flood elevation for your elevation certificate.
In all of my discussions with FEMA and DNRAC, they have said that's a futile task in a ocean tidal environment. And FEMA does have 500-year elevations for riverian topology because it's defined drainage areas. There are good ground contours. The water is only coming from one direction. But as Sumner has pointed out, here, I mean, the 500-year flood elevation is based upon the assumption that the dunes hold, or which way the wind is blowing, and that's why they don't publish a number, because there's too much uncertainty with any number. Yet the regulation says that's the number that you should be using.
So right now, what this is saying is it's part of the floodplain. If you're worried about the 500-year, if we were using the high range, I'd be worried about the 500-year, but we're using the intermediate range that's showing that if you're in the 100-year, you're going to have to comply. Very few properties in the 500-year or Zone X are going to have to comply. So I think you're worried about like 0.5% that we can figure out how to do that if it comes up. But the majority of the almost 99.9% of the properties are going to be in the 100-year floodplain. We have a base flood elevation, so we know how to calculate the sea level rise. And as the sea level rise changes, as the floodplain changes, we'll be able to continue to address the concerns. If we have a rarity outside, we also have capabilities of figuring that out.
I agree with you from a two-dimensional perspective. We know whether a property is with a high degree of confidence inside or outside of a two-dimensional map. What we don't have is the third dimension.
Right. I agree with everything you're saying, Tom. I mean, it's one thing to be on a map, but it's another to say, what's the vertical standard to which you can build? You know, right now in the 100-year floodplain, we say you factor in the AE class, AE8, and then Robin adds 18 inches to that. But I think what we're getting at is that the sea level rise is suggesting that we need to go beyond that. Are we not?
Yes,
in the third
no.
dimension.
So what I showed at the last meeting, let me see if I can find it real quick. It goes, okay, you have your base flood elevation. You have then your design flood elevation, which is your freeboard. And then you have your sea level rise, and then how you're designing to do your sea level rise. So you're gonna end up building up. But say I'm at an AE6, I have my 18 inches, but we're both at the same 25-year floodplain, but you're at an AE7 for your base flood elevation. So we both have our 18 inches of freeboard, and then we have our sea level rise on top of that.
But that is not what the federal regulation says. Go back and read the last sentence in the federal reg.
This is the thing you sent out on critical infrastructure?
Yes.
Can you pull that back up on the screen,
Give me just a minute. I'm trying to find something else right now.
Can you read it to us, Tom?
Yeah, let me pull it up, Sumner. Hold on a second here.
So under Executive Order 11,988, floodplain management, federal agencies funding and permitting critical facilities are required to avoid using the 0.2% 500-year floodplain or protect the facilities to the 0.2% chance flood level.
That's the part that, so what is the elevation that we're protecting to?
Right. So is there a I mean, that's really interesting. Is there I mean, they make these maps, and the maps don't exactly follow topography. Like we talked about, there's other variables that they factored into the two-dimensional areas. But somewhere in there, they must have in their calculations elevations that go with those maps. Are those available?
We'll have to,
So
I'll reach out and see what we can find.
Tom, this is what you're saying. There's a number for the middle of the Delaware Bay, and I mean, is that what you're talking about?
That's right, yes. If you go to FEMA and you ask them, they do not have them for ocean tidal areas.
Not for the 500, no.
Not for the 500.
So it's this magical soup that they stir, and out comes a map for a two-dimensional representation, but there's nothing that allows you to visualize what the height of the water would be.
So according to Brent, the 500-year is the area of 1% chance flood with an average depth less than 1 foot.
Okay. I was just going to get to that it means something about something's going to be wet and something's not going to be wet. Okay. All right. So we have a foot error bar effectively on that line. But then in order to figure out how deep the water is off of the outer extent of the 500-year floodplain, the 500-year area on the map, and this, I've been playing around with this a little bit on the GIS, you have to pick each property and look at, well, I mean, I guess we could figure out the elevation by looking at it.
So each property, no matter what, is going to be unique, because my property might be one elevation, your property might be another one, and Tom's might be a third. So they're all going to be unique as to what your base flood elevation is, which is what it is now. Your base flood plus 18 inches. All we're
Right.
gonna do is base flood, 18 inches, sea level rise.
So I'm going to throw this at Brent, and if he can't be brought up, we'll hope he can respond in writing. Seems to me that we could use the GIS to evaluate what the elevation is of that 500-year floodplain line. I mean, you know, what kind of variability will that have across the Lewis landscape? I mean, that would give you a rough estimate of the Z dimension, the vertical dimension that Tom's looking for.
Because if what Brett is saying, and I've not seen that before, Brett, on the 1% chance of a depth of less than 1 foot is true, then we could take the 100-year base flood elevation, add 1 foot to it, and then add sea level rise as the required construction elevation, or the 25-year, or whatever number it is.
Those are different. Those are different. The base flood elevation is the 100-year thing. If we're talking about the 500-year thing, those are that. I mean, I'm not sure I follow what you're saying, Tom.
Well, I'm not quite sure I'm understanding. I'm trying to figure out what the 500-year area of a 1% chance of flood to an average depth of 1 foot.
Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen and show you the 100-year and the 500-year. And you're gonna see the 500-year is falling into water bodies, ponds, and wetlands.
What do you mean falling into?
That's where it's kind of located. There's a few places it's land, but it's really falling onto there. So you see the peach color, the blue is 100-year. The white is, it's not, the bay, of course, is not colored because I didn't turn the water body on. The hash mark up here is the VE, and then the peach color is our 500-year.
Do you have the I don't know if it was a state or a county topography contour? I'm just wondering what the elevation is of.
Well, over here it's AE8. This is
No. That's 7.
not what I mean. You're looking at the
No.
contours. Yeah, I don't have the contours up at the moment.
I'll mess around with this. I'll do this offline and get back to you. I don't want to waste time on this any further on this. I'll do some investigation, and I guess I'm gonna invite Brent or Charlie or anybody else that might want to help me with the. I just want to look at what these lines look like in the landscape. The blue line, the assumption is that the blue area will pretty much follow a certain elevation, plus some accounting for storm surge and aspect and so on, which direction it faces relative to the winds and so on that would typically bring the storms and the higher water. And from what I gather, there's more of that funny business that happens with the 0.2%, the 500, so-called 500-year floodplain, the tan areas on this map that you've got on your screen. But I guess I was just trying to get at, to get a rough idea of what that Z value is in Tom's questions. You could figure that out by looking at what areas are activated in that tan, what are the elevations of those tan areas on this map on the screen right now. But I don't want to speculate. I want to go back and look at it, and I'll do that offline.
Okay.
So I think this is the big issue that needs to be resolved, to not only for the section that we're looking at, but for all 3 sections, is what are we going to use for, what are we going to tell people that the regulation is based upon? You're adding sea level rise to what? And that has to be defined. And if it's going to be an engineering study, so be it. But there's a large cost incurred with that. Or we're going to point to AE dash whatever plus margin, but whatever that is, it's got to be clearly defined in the ordinance. Otherwise, we've written something that the first time someone tries to build out in the back of Canary Creek is not going to be able, we're going to wind up with a disagreement of what the number is.
Right. Right. You want something that's easy enough that any property owner can engage with a surveyor to figure out what that number is going to be. It's like when you go out to some of these new properties that are around, they build stairs that go to nowhere just so you can stand up and get an idea of where your living floor might be. And that's kind of what we need to figure out. All right. Somebody's got something to add here.
It was Brent saying that there isn't going to be a big elevation difference between the 100 and 500-year elevation. But it goes back to the meeting when it was suggested that we use the base flood elevation for us freeboard plus another number. If you're worried about a 500. So this is, and again, this is what I showed last time, which is what a couple other places are using, is you have your grade, you have your FEMA base flood, you have your freeboard, and then you have where you're going to build. What we're just going to do is take that, add our sea level rise difference, and then that's where you're going to build to.
What's
No,
the DFE?
Is that you add
It's the design flood elevation, which is where you're going to end up building.
Okay.
and what Brett is suggesting is that you need to add another number into here, which is
The fudge factor.
a fudge fact. Yeah, it's the page number at the bottom of the page that makes the equation right. To adjust for the fact that the 500-year is higher than the 100-year.
So we're going to put fudge factor in the glossary of terms.
Yeah. It's that
Okay, fudge factor it is.
multiply by, divide, or add to get the right answer. And I would be okay with that because I do agree with Brett's comment, and from all the research I've done, that, and this is what the state has done, by the way, for when they're designing roads. They don't know what the 500-year floodplain and seal, so they've just arbitrarily added 3 feet elevation.
Yeah, a lot of places we're just going 3 feet above base flood elevation.
But that's basically a 100-year sea level rise on top of a 100-year flood.
This example is what a couple of places are using. When you're building new, redeveloping, you're building to that level.
And these places, were they tidal ocean that you went to? Know?
Norfolk, Charleston, they're all tidal.
Because when you go and you read all of the reports we've had done, whether it's the hydrology report of the firm and the other ones, you know, our flooding in Delaware is much worse, tends to be much worse the further up the bay you go, because it's blockage of the bay, rainfall, and storm combined.
I think I'm less familiar with Charleston, but I'm very comfortable with looking at what a place like Norfolk is doing. Norfolk is sort of, for better or worse, ahead of us in terms of having to deal with this. And I think they're taking a pretty aggressive stance on it, which I hope.
I believe they're one of the ones that just did 3 feet.
All right. I'm not sure I'm prepared to commit to the equation today, all the different pieces that, for example, Brent just threw out there. You know, what that elevation is going to be. But I don't know where that leaves us.
So I think it leaves us with a good starting point. I'll reach out to Brent, get some ideas from him. You guys can put some ideas together. And then since you wanted to start thinking about redevelopment, start putting some ideas down, sending them to me so I can start turning them into next step for redevelopment. And we'll try and solve the number problem and have that ready for the next meeting. And then we'll start looking at redevelopment for the next meeting. But if you've got ideas for redevelopment, just start sending them my way.
Okay, so you know, the last piece that Brent just threw on the chat, I know I personally am having trouble with this. We've been talking a lot about critical facilities, and I think a lot of the questions that Tom's been raising, they don't apply just to critical facilities. This calculus for me is really going to come into its own and really be most important when we get into redevelopment and new development. And so I'm constantly getting thrown back thinking about that. And I assume Tom is as well. So I think it's important that we do keep that straight. We do need to figure out these numbers and what target elevations we're working on. But how we treat each of these different classes of existing facilities, critical facilities, redevelopment opportunities, and so on, that's where it seems to me the English is.
Yeah, I think the numbers are going to change a little bit depending on what we're doing. Because again, critical facilities, we're worried about one thing. Redevelopment, we're going to be worried about something else. And new development, we're going to be worried about something else. So let's not focus too heavily on what the number is today, because the number might be one for one thing and it's something else for something else. So if you want to, I'll reach out to try to figure out, get some ideas for the numbering items. Homework, start thinking about redevelopment and send me those ideas so I can start putting something together so we have something to discuss for the next meeting.
Okay.
And when would you guys like to meet next?
Mm.
You want to do 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
I'm okay with this 2-week thing. I mean, you know.
So 2 weeks is July 1st, just a heads up.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Okay. 11 o'clock still good?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna set it up for Zoom because it might still be, but so just if that changes, I'll let you know.
I was under the impression that Planning Commission was staying under Zoom.
Planning Commission definitely, we can't get that many people. But even,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
it's the number of people issues, but even today, I don't think we'd have, based on the fact that there's 7 people, I think we'd have still social distancing issues. So just giving you guys updates.
Okay.
Okay, so July 1st.
Great.
11 a.m. Please send me information ahead of time so I can start putting that redevelopment together.
And Janelle, if I can just ask that, you know, if Sumner and I can get whatever the work product is before the meeting also, so we have a chance to look it over.
Yep, the sooner you get information, I can get information back to you guys.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, great.
All right. Anything else?
That should be it for now.
Okay, I'll see you guys tonight.
See you at 6.
Yeah, see you in a little while. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.